Good morning and welcome to the second of what we will hope will be 6 forums for candidates for office for November 6th that is being brought to you by Cayuga Community College and the Citizen. I'm your moderator, Guy Cosentino. On November 6th, voters across the nation get to go to the polls to vote for members of the House of Representatives, in many cases, including New York, the U.S. Senate. But voters will also go to elect all of the members of the New York State Legislature, that's 63 members of the Senate and 150 members of the Assembly. Cayuga County has 3 senators. Senator John DeFrancisco represents the 50th Senate District. He is retiring this year and covers parts of the city and areas east. Senator Pam Helming represents the 54th District, which includes the rest of the city and points west of the county and north. The 51st Senate District is now represented by Senator James Seward. It includes the town of Owasco and goes along the east side of Owasco Lake, headed down south to Moravia and beyond. Senator Seward was first elected in 1986 to the Senate representing Cayuga County, and then in 2012, through redistricting, he ended up representing Cayuga County again when he was reelected in November 2012. This year, Joyce St. George is challenging him. They are both here in the studio to answer questions about themselves and the issues facing the district and the state of New York. Jeremy Boyer, as always, is our questioner. He is the executive editor of The Citizen. Mr. Boyer's column appears today on Thursdays in The Citizen. He'll be asking all of our candidates their questions. Our candidates are sitting in the order of their opening statements by a coin toss. Joyce St. George is on the Democratic and Women's Equality Party. Welcome.
Thank you.
Senator Seward is on the Republican, Conservative, Independent, and Reform parties, and welcome to you, both of you.
Thank you.
We're delighted to have you here in the studio, and we appreciate your time for the students and the community. We'll start with the opening statements. As we said, you have 2 minutes. Kai is our timekeeper, and he'll keep track of you. Ms. St. George.
Thank you. Hello to everybody. I'm Joyce St. George, and I am running for the Senate for the 51st District. I'll tell you a little bit about me and much more about what I'd like to do. I'm a former corruption investigator. I investigated corruption in New York City. I'm a court mediator up here in Delaware County. I'm also somebody who has served for about 10 years on a hospital board and have done a lot of community work, including running food pantry and a coalition on addiction. And so my interest in running is because I feel that we are not being served to the extent that we can be, that there are many issues that we need to pay attention to and do something about, including the environment, including the underserved and the people who really need to be helped. People in poverty, people with disabilities, college students, and their concerns with student debt and with the possibility of marijuana being legalized in New York State. We have a lot of issues that we could talk about, and I'd like to be able to do that today, and I'm hoping that we can sort out many of these issues and get some clarity on them in terms of where I would like to go with them and where they are now.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Jim Seward, who is on the Republican, Conservative, Independent, and Reform parties. Senator.
Thank you. It's great to be back on campus. I'm truly honored to serve the people of the 51st Senate District, to stand up for those who call this region home, and to be your voice at the state capitol. When I was first elected, all of Cayuga County was in the district until the 1992 redistricting. Then in 2012, I was fortunate to regain 6 towns in this county. It has been great to be back, rekindling the partnerships that I had cultivated with local officials, business owners, not-for-profit agencies, and the people and residents who live and work here. Those partnerships have produced some real results. For example, in my first term, I helped secure the Cayuga Correctional Facility in Moravia with over 300 local jobs. And both Moravia and the Auburn school districts are financially benefiting from the end of the gap elimination adjustment, which I fought hard to abolish, providing much needed additional funding. I've worked with local environmental officials to help protect Owasco Lake. I met personally with our State Parks Commissioner to impress upon her the importance of Fillmore Glen State Park, and major improvements have been made to the pavilion and the bathhouse, and we're advocating for further updates. I have secured funds to increase broadband availability in southern Cayuga County and modernize our local libraries. And I've pressed the state DOT and the governor to keep our concerns about truck traffic on our roads in mind as they reconfigure Interstate 81. So together we've accomplished a great deal. However, there is so much more to do. Much of upstate New York has actually lost population. To reverse that trend, we need to create new opportunities for people and to ensure that our state is more affordable for residents and businesses alike.
Thank you. We'll now have, for the next 50 minutes or so, questioning from Mr. Boyer. He can ask a question of either of you, or individual, or both. And if he has questions for both of you, we'll just reverse order in how we answer. Mr. Boyer, welcome back.
All right, thank you, and thank you both for coming over here. I know it's not a short trip to come all the way from the other side of the district over here, and that's kind of where my first question is going. This is kind of a massive geographic district. It's got 9 counties going from Ulster all the way over to here, up to Herkimer County as far north and down to south of Ithaca. With all that territory to cover, how do you go about staying on top of what's important to local constituents and being accessible to local constituents in such a district? What would be your approach to that?
And this is for both?
For both.
Okay, Ms. St. George, you'll have 2 minutes on this.
You talk, you listen, you travel. There are 9 different counties. It's the size of Connecticut, actually, this district. And part of it is that it's a very diverse district. It's very rural, but we do have different towns that have different issues. And so the only way to know what those towns are and where their issues lie is to go there and listen. Not talk, not, make speeches, but really and truly to sit down with groups and listen to them. And that's one of the things that I've been doing for the last 8 months. And what I find is Cayuga is very different from Ulster. We share a lot of the same issues in terms of lack of broadband, infrastructure. We have a lot of different issues. Poverty is a huge issue all around these 9 counties. But in terms of what we can do to be on top of everything in every town, it's really a matter of learning who the leaders are, learning who the unofficial leaders are, because every community has unofficials. Talking to them and asking them, what do we need? Where are the issues? What are the issues? And then just really taking into account the things that they've tried, the things that they haven't tried, what has worked, what has not worked, where are they lacking, what are the resources that they need, and how do we get them to there? How do we get them the resources and the services that they need? There are certain communities that have resources, and then there are certain communities that are sorely lacking in the resources and desperately need them. Those are the ones we have to listen to, and we have to figure out ways to spread the resources and spread the services so that they can be accessed by all the groups within these communities and these towns.
Thank you. Senator Seward, how do you keep in touch with constituents?
Well, we do have a big district, but I put a high priority on keeping in touch with the constituents throughout the 9-county area. That's why I put close to 45 to 50,000 miles on my vehicle every year, traveling the district when we're not in session in Albany, because I believe that everyone in each community should have access to their representative in the state Senate. And I believe in communicating with people. Obviously, the best way to do that is face-to-face, and that's why we travel the district, attending meetings, speaking at chambers of commerce, Rotary clubs, going to town board meetings, all of those things, just moving around the district and letting people have access to me directly to express their concerns and express their opinions. We also have used technology to help keep in touch with people. I have well over 20,000 people on my email list through the Senate. And with a push of a button on my computer, I can communicate with all of those individuals. That, I think, has proven to be a great way to communicate. People are very comfortable with that medium today, and it's a great way to communicate. We also use the mails, phone calls, whatever it takes. I keep my ear to the ground, and I think that if you look at the items that I mentioned in my opening statement, I've spent time here in Cayuga County. I know what the concerns are in this county, and I've acted on those concerns.
Thank you, Senator.
Just a quick follow-up on that issue, or just on the idea of staying in touch. District offices are always an interesting decision that you have to make as far as where you're going to put staff on the ground. Do you anticipate any changes if you're reelected, Senator Seward? And do you have any thoughts on where you would have those offices? Because you can't have one in every community, obviously, so you got to pick your spots. So I'll let them both go to that maybe for a minute.
We'll do that for 1 minute. Senator Seward, any changes?
I don't anticipate them. I have a district office in Cortland, and my staff person there is responsible for, on a day-to-day basis, when I'm in Albany or elsewhere in the district, to communicate with the people of Cayuga County. The Cortland office is sort of the western frontier for me in terms of servicing this end of the district. I also have a main district office in Oneonta, and we have one up in Herkimer as well. And so, you know, the budgets are such that I'd like to have more district offices. I'd love to have one in every county. That's not financially possible. But I think we have set a standard that we keep in touch with people, and people have access to me and my office.
Ms. St. George, a minute on this issue of location of an office, district office.
Well, I think we would have a virtual office. We're pretty savvy on Facebook and some of the other social networks, so I think that what we would be how we would be communicating in general would be virtual. But I think that Cortland is one of the areas that seems to be able to cover this area. And I think Oneonta is another one. But I would actually, we go way east of here. And I think a lot of the people in Shandaken, in Ulster County, feel forgotten. So I would try to bring something a little bit further over to the, you know, the Shandaken Olive area. I think that that's a population that really requires a little bit more attention.
Mr. Boyer.
Okay, I'll turn to one of the issues that's sort of statewide but very acute here locally, and that is the water quality. And here in Owasco Lake, we've had harmful algal blooms as a threat to not only recreational use of the lake, but also the drinking water supply. So, you know, with that being said, there have been efforts through the state, through DEC, in the last couple of years to try to address this issue. My question for both people is, you know, what do you think of those efforts so far as have they been the right approach, and what else would you like to see happen as we go forward?
And we'll go with Senator Seward first, because that was a 1 minute follow-up before. Senator, you have 2 minutes on this issue of water quality.
Well, no question, the quality of the water in Owasco Lake is a key issue here in this county. That lake is not only important to us in terms of recreational value, but also it's the drinking supply for some 50,000 people in this region. And when this algae bloom problem has emerged in the last few years, I was among those in the Senate, in our delegation here in Cayuga County, to have the state step up to the plate, you know, financially, to try to deal with this problem. For example, 3 years ago, I provided $200,000 for the Dutch Hollow Brook watershed improvements to try to cut down on the nutrients that were going into the lake from that source. That project has just been completed. I read that in the Auburn Citizen recently. And then the following year, we came in with $600,000 of state resources to try to get to the bottom of just what's causing these algae blooms. And this past state budget that we enacted at the end of March includes $65 million in funding to deal with this harmful algae bloom problem. And so we intend to work very closely with the administration, the governor. He has a special task force involves DEC and other agencies on this problem. I am going to, following the election when we get a little later in the year, I believe that we need to have a meeting here in Cayuga County on this topic to bring everyone up to date on where we are in terms of the state response and take further input from local citizens.
Okay. Ms. St. George?
Well, algae blooms are happening all over the state. We know this. I'm in a watershed area in New York State, and I'm getting word that there are algae blooms in the watershed, which is very frightening, as well as it is frightening here. I think that there are many studies out on algae blooms at this point that really speak to recommendations for greater research, greater intervention, and earlier intervention. Part of the interventions that are discussed have to do with obviously the nitrogen and the phosphorus that goes into the water, and maybe helping farmers to become more organic so that some of the chemicals that are coming in and leaching into the water can be dissipated through that method. But the other thing is we have global warming, and it seems like people don't want to pay attention to it. The UN just came out with a study saying that we are having dire consequences, and these consequences are going to increase dramatically within the next 10 to 20 years. So we are already seeing what fossil fuel is doing. I would not want fossil fuel to continue. I would want to stop the warming of the waters, which is what is really doing the trick on the algae blooms. We've been having chemicals in water for a while, but we haven't had algae blooms the way that we're getting them now. We have to start working away from our addiction away from fossil fuels, and we have to get to renewables. If we don't get to renewables, all the work and all the money that you'd like to throw into this is not going to work. We have to take it from a very holistic perspective. Otherwise, we're doomed.
Thank you. Senator, you'll have 1 minute to respond.
Sure. Just a couple of further thoughts. We are also, and it surrounds Wasco Lake, many farms and agricultural locations. And I believe that it's very, very important for us to work closely with the farming community to help them to come in with best practices in terms of manure management and the like. That will help with this problem as well. And I would agree that climate change is a factor here. I support the creation of a state climate action council to look at ways that the New York State can deal with this issue of climate change practices where needed. But we need a council that will oversee the process here in New York State so that they can assess a plan that they will develop, as well as look at the cost-benefit analysis of doing all of those actions. So there's a lot to do here, both from the climate change issue, and of course, in the meantime, we've got to make sure that our drinking water right here in Cayuga County is safe.
Thank you. Mr. Boyer.
You both touched on farming, and I did want to ask a follow-up about that, because that's always, you know, and especially in the last couple of years, there's that tension of, we know how important farms are to our economy and obviously just to feeding the world. At the same time, there's the contribution or the impact they can have on water quality. So some have called for increased regulation or increased enforcement of, you know, regulations that are already on the books. Do you think that's something that's needed at this point? Increased regulation and enforcement.
Okay, Ms. St. George, you'll have 2 minutes on this subject.
Increased regulation and enforcement. It's very tough on farmers right now, and I would hate to force more on them. They are suffering. We've had several suicides of farmers. I've never heard until this year that farmers are actually getting suicide intervention and counseling services notices along with their feed, which is horrendous. I think that farmers would like to improve their methods. Every farmer I speak to would like to, and has tried to do as much as they can on their own. I'm not sure the state has been behind them as much as they can. I have dairy farmer friends who are on welfare right now because they cannot afford to do anything more than they're already doing. So yes, we've got to get more organic and more diversified. That's part of what farming needs to happen for farming. But I think I would rather do it through education and training and vocational training. I'd rather do it through partnerships than regulations. I don't think farmers want to, they're the ones who take care of our land. They don't want to hurt it. And I think that they understand what goes on with manure piles. They understand nitrogen. They understand all of nitrates and all the things that are going on right now. They're the ones who are actually taking the lead in trying to save whatever land they have around them. So I think I would rather see partnerships with state organizations and other group organizations, nonprofits, that could really work with them to help them understand different farming practices around the world that are working right now. I know Canada is doing a great deal of this right now, and I think that we can find some models from Canada that could really guide us and help us.
Thank you. Senator, this issue of farming regulation?
Mm-hmm. I just yesterday had written to the Commissioner of DEC during the comment period on the proposed changes in the CAFO regulations here in New York State. The Owasco Lake Watershed Council has been urging, as well as other local officials here in the county, have been urging the DEC to come in with a regulatory process that is more transparent, and there's more oversight over these permits, these CAFO permits. And so I have supported that in a letter to the Commissioner. I've supported our local officials here in this county. But having said that, I do not see this as a farming versus environment issue. Our farmers are our very first environmentalists. I mean, they live off the land. They depend on the land, and they depend on clean water. And so they are our first environmentalists, and we need to help our agricultural community to develop best practices, particularly in manure management and other ways that we can help our farmers to improve operations on their particular farm and also help protect our waters.
All right, thank you, Mr. Boyer.
All right, I'm going to have a series of questions. Hopefully, we can get through here on some issues that kind of high-profile issues that I'm guessing have, to a degree come up, but it will also most likely come up next year in Albany. One is the Child Victims Act. That's legislation that would extend the statute of limitations for child sex abuse cases, and there's been division within the legislature over that bill. So I want to know where you each stand on that.
Senator Seward, you'll have 2 minutes on this issue.
This issue of abuse of our children is a very serious one. And during my time in the State Senate, I have, over a long period of time, supported changes in our state laws to come down tougher on those perpetrators that harm our children in this way. And so that record is very, very clear. We need to come down hard on those individuals criminally so that they are not able to continue these horrific acts in harming our children. When it comes to the Crime Victims Act, I am a co-sponsor of a bill in the Senate that is called the Child Victims Compensation Fund Act. That would establish not taxpayer money, but through monies that have been forfeited by the criminal element, a $300 million fund, for starters, to allow those who have been harmed either physically or emotionally to have a way to receive some compensation for their damages. And so I am fully supportive of doing something here. I do not want to have a situation where it's just a trial lawyer's bonanza. And the Crime Victims Act that has passed the State Assembly only would zero in on only a certain percentage of victims, those that have been victims of organizations such as the Catholic Church, the Boy Scouts, or a school district, something of that sort. That would not cover those who have suffered from sexual abuse by someone they know, maybe in someone's home. And our plan in the Senate would do that. We need to come together and resolve this issue. I'm prepared to go back and do so.
Thank you, Senator. Ms. St. George, on the issue of the Child Victims Act.
Oh, Lord, it's been years. I was a sex crimes expert. I was an expert witness on sex crimes in the Queens District Attorney's Office in New York City for quite a few years. And I worked with survivors of sex crimes for about 30 years as a counselor. And I can tell you that we've all learned this over the last month or so, haven't we, with the Kavanaugh hearings, that people who suffer through these crimes don't come forward easily or early. It's a very tough crime to solve. As a police, I was in law enforcement, and I could tell you, very often there are no witnesses. Very often there is nothing to go by except that that person's memory has been seared with the incident. And we have to be able to expand these statutes of limitation. We have to, I mean, I think it'd be great to compensate victims of crimes. We do have the Victims Crime Act. But to be quite honest, people who have suffered through this aren't interested in money. They're interested in credibility, and they're interested in understanding, and they're interested in the legal system moving forward on their word. Because most of the time when I've interviewed survivors of these incidents, they were extremely detailed on certain things, such as the incident, but they could not remember other generalized factors. And for many people in law enforcement and the criminal justice system, it's very difficult if you have a stereotypical idea of what rape or sex abuse is, to really understand that not remembering those external details is a factor in rape crisis syndromes. So you have to be able to take that into account. I don't think right now that we're doing evidence-based prosecution on this, and I think we need to in New York State, and I think we need to expand all term limits on that.
Okay, Senator, you'll have 1 minute to respond.
Sure. Just a couple of quick points. The legislation that I'm co-sponsoring in the State Senate would in fact do away with the statute of limitations on these types of crimes. I think that's very, very important to do so, because very often these feelings and memories are suppressed for many years and they come out later. And that's why through the doing away with the statute of limitations for these types of crimes would in fact allow for a criminal prosecution of those perpetrators. And also another feature in the legislation is adding clergy to the list of mandated reporters of these crimes if they become aware of them. We need to come down hard on this issue. We have made changes in the law already. We need to make these further changes that I've outlined.
Thank you. Mr. Boyer.
Okay. Another one is health insurance, healthcare. There's been legislation that's pretty, one thing that could change in the Senate is who's in control, and I'll ask you a question both about that. I'll ask you both a question about that a little bit, hopefully. But one issue is healthcare. There's legislation proposing single-payer health plan in New York State. So I'd like to hear where each of you stand on that idea as well.
All right. Ms. St. George, you're up first. 2 minutes.
I'm very much in favor of the New York Health Act. I don't think it's complete. I think that there's still plenty of things that need to be settled with it, but it is built on sound finance, and I think that looking at where we are, where we've been, I certainly don't want to keep going there. As somebody who was the chair of a hospital, it used to torment me every month to have to read how much money we were losing at our hospital for charity cases. And those are people who could not afford to pay for their medications. We took it on as hospitals. We absorbed the costs. And that's why so many hospitals have been going under. I think at this point, if you look at it in terms of what we would get out of it, it would be an all-inclusive, full body, if you will, opportunity, so that dental, vision, hearing, every mental health, treatment would all be included in it. And I think that that is very important. I'll also think that it would give us a better opportunity to regulate healthcare in a different way, so that we're not looking at people who are just getting service, but we're looking at the quality of that service and holding people accountable, medical people accountable for the service they're providing, not just for seeing somebody. So the outcome-oriented proposal is a very important one. And then I would talk about rural health in general. I know that 3 counties in this 9 counties of this district do not have a maternity ward. So anybody from Delaware County or Schoharie or Otsego, if they are having a baby, they have to plan to drive over an hour to get to a hospital. We have to change these things.
Thank you. Senator Seward, on the issue of single payer and health care in general.
Mm-hmm. Well, when it comes to the single payer legislation that my opponent supports, I say the intent is very admirable, but it's just not workable or affordable for a state to do this on its own. And that's why it is opposed by the State Business Council, NFIB, Unshackled New York, and many hospital organizations have expressed grave concerns over that proposal. The state of Vermont attempted to do this. That's Bernie Sanders' home state. They backed away from it because they just couldn't make it work. What would be required to go down this road of single payer? Everyone would lose the coverage that they have now and would be placed in a state government-run health program. What would that cost the state of New York? The estimates are that the first year we would have to increase taxes $139 billion. That would grow to $210 billion every year by the year 2031. And also, to make this work at all, the reimbursements to medical providers would have to be seriously decreased. That's according to the RAND report. So right now, we have a new low in terms of the number of uninsured here in New York State. It's about in the 4 to 5% range. That's been cut by 2/3 in recent years because of some changes we made in the state of New York, and I've been part of those in terms of implementing the Affordable Care Act, bringing in special programs to get more people with health insurance. Rather than bankrupting the state, let's zero in on what we can do to provide health coverage for that remaining 4 to 5% that are uninsured, and of course there are those that I would say are underinsured that also need assistance.
Ms. St. George, you'll have a minute to respond.
Well, as somebody who is in charge of insurance for the entire state and is on the healthcare committee, the numbers are not correct. And taking money from lobbyists who are insurers, insurance companies, pharmacies, things like that, it provides me with a conflict of interest of whether or not you can actually look at this program. Right now, we're paying 20% in administrative costs. This would give us 2%. We don't even know how much profit there is in pharmaceutical medicines, in pharmaceutical hospital costs, and physician costs. We don't know it all. And I'm looking at the underinsured, who are most of us. Underinsured, the people who come into my hospital and still have to pay $60, $70, $80 for a copay. Or if they have to go to the emergency room, they have to pay $2,500 on their own. This is what we're fighting for, and this is what we can make work.
Okay, thank you, Ms. St. George. Senator, you'll have 1 minute to respond.
Okay. Yes, my opposition to this single-payer plan has nothing to do with listening to health insurers at all. I'm listening to the business groups, hospital groups, and others who are interested in this issue. And my numbers come right out of the RAND report that was recently done. There have been a number of studies on this, but let's zero in on the RAND report, which clearly states we would need to raise taxes in New York State 156% first year. And also, they go on to point out that higher income earners and businesses are likely to leave. They're going to flee the state of New York because of these taxes going through the roof. Healthcare providers will leave the state of New York because of lower reimbursements. And our hospitals are already in somewhat of a precarious financial condition. Many will go under if their reimbursements are cut under this program. And so this has a great number of problems, well-intended, just not workable. Let's look at zeroing in on the remaining uninsured and underinsured. Let's do something for them rather than taking coverage away. And
thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Did you want to respond? I will extend it for 1 more minute for each of you if you want.
I think this is an extremely important issue for everybody, and it's not just business groups. I think that individuals are sweating it out. There are many companies that help insure our employees, but most of the people in New York State who have insurance are not able to pay all the co-pays, all the deductibles. If you add, the 159 is a correct amount, but we already have 89 billion of that. It's the remainder of that we are looking at, but we're looking at consolidating all of our costs so that nobody has to pay a copay anymore, nobody has to pay a deductible, and they come to about $7,000 a year in addition to insurance costs. So you're still paying for insurance. You're just paying a lower number because we are all in it. And we are paying a lower number because we are able to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies, with other entities that right now are charging us too much money. There is great hope for this. And we've already been to the profit-oriented insurance. We've been doing that for years. And right now, the healthcare system is collapsing under its own weight. And it's doing it through the people.
Thank you, Ms. St. George. Senator, you'll have 1 minute on this as well.
Sure, very, very briefly. As one that's been involved in state government for a number of years, I would be the first to say that state government is not going to be able to efficiently operate a health insurance program of this magnitude. What we're talking about here, let's be factual. Our seniors who are on Medicare, they would lose their Medicare. They'd go into this single payer arrangement. Those that are happy with their coverage, or either through a union or their employment, they would lose their coverage under this plan. So I say a much better way to go would be to, rather than bankrupting the state, let's zero in on the remaining uninsured and underinsured. Let those that are happy with their current coverage keep their coverage. This I can say for certain. Under this plan, if you like your coverage and care, you're going to lose your coverage and care going into some unknown way of doing this on a state basis. I think this is a better discussion nationally rather than have a New York State go it alone, because we will see businesses and people flee this state.
Thank you, Senator. My instinct is you both could talk about this for another 40 minutes, but we've been through 40 minutes of this, and just so our viewers know, we are in the about 2/3 of the way through our 51st Senate District Forum. This is a race that pits incumbent James Seward, who is on the Republican, Conservative, Independence, and Reform lines, against his challenger. Joyce St. George is on the Democratic and Working Women's Equality Party. We have too many W's right now. That may change come November, but anyway. Mr. Boyer.
All right. Well, hopefully 2 more issues, and then hopefully these are, you know, clear cut and easy to explain your positions on quickly.
Promises, promises.
Sports betting. It's now possible that New York State could enact legislation to allow legalized sports betting. Is it something we should do?
Senator, I think you go first, because I think Ms. St. George started health care.
Okay. Well, when it comes to sports betting, of course, now the states are able to move forward with that. Believe me, I'm not one that is happy about having a high percentage of the state revenues dependent on gaming. But the fact of the matter is, sports betting is here. It's all around us, and let's regulate it and in fact tax it. So I would support legislation in the Senate that would bring sports betting to New York State. I know I met with a number of professional athletic organizations like the Major League Baseball and the NFL have been into the Capitol talking about this issue. They want to maintain what they call the integrity of the games, and I think there are safeguards that we can build in to do exactly that. So as long as the integrity of the sports are maintained, and there's great demand for doing this, other states are already moving forward, so I would support the legislation.
Okay. Ms. St. George, on the issue of betting.
How about this? I actually concur. It makes sense. It is already happening. We used to have our bookies, and we would just be able to tax things. So I do concur with what Senator Seward's saying on this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, on that point, we will
Nice
move
and
on
quick.
to
Maybe
One
we should
more.
end the program right there.
One more, and that's, and I think you touched on it, Ms. St. George, is recreational marijuana. It's being looked at now, and you know, some states have gone that route, and should New York do that?
And you'll get 2 minutes on this as well.
Yes. Is an emphatic yes. We need to legalize marijuana for a variety of reasons. One is, I always compare it, and I know people will differ with this, but marijuana is less dangerous than drinking alcohol. And I think that we can certainly regulate it. You know, instead of a DWI, you have something else. But at this point, marijuana is not a gateway drug, as some people would have you think it is. It is just a recreational way. It's a way of just relaxing. And also, as we're aging, many more of us will be having aches and pains and difficulties with many of parts of our bodies. And marijuana is one of the best ways to reduce pain. I had a back injury a few years ago, and I went to one doctor, and they said, well, I can't do anything for you, but I'll throw you a bunch of Oxy. And then I went to another doctor, and they said, well, we can't do anything for you, but I'll throw you lots of Oxy. And then I went to a pain management, and they threw me Hydro. Now, none of those drugs are helpful. Those are that's the gateway to the kind of epidemic we have today with addiction. But I could tell you that with marijuana, that would ease the pain for backaches and for many other ailments that we're suffering, whether we're young or old. And I do not see a reason why we should keep it illegal. It also is a huge criminal justice reform issue. I don't think people should be put in jail because they were arrested with a little bit of marijuana, but that's what we have right now. And that is, for me, as a former police officer, that's horrendous.
Thank you. Senator, on the issue of recreational marijuana.
Mm-hmm. I'm not keen on the legalization of recreational marijuana. I'm hearing too much from our county sheriffs, other law enforcement officials who are telling me that based on what they're hearing in these other states, such as Colorado, that has moved forward, that there are big problems when it comes to dealing with this from a law enforcement point of view in terms of traffic and accidents and so on. I also have had discussions with those that I'm working with on the heroin and opioid addiction epidemic that we've seen right here in Cayuga County and around the state. They are opposed to this because it really does send the wrong signal to those that we're trying to keep away from heroin and opioid, to say marijuana is okay. Also, we have smoking cessation programs in the state of New York. Once again, we put a stamp of approval on smoking marijuana. Now, I am a great proponent of medical marijuana. There's a difference, recreational and medical marijuana. I do support that concept. And we have a form of medical marijuana here in New York State. And in this past year, we have expanded that program to cover such things as chronic pain, also PTSD in terms of our veterans returning from combat. They now can have access to medical marijuana. And so I would rather zero in on what we can do to improve the medical marijuana program in the state of New York. I would add this. I would like to see the decriminalization of simple possession of marijuana because I think that would go a long way toward unclogging our criminal justice system and be more realistic.
Thank you, Senator.
Well,
we'll give you 1 minute.
Okay, I just think that we have to separate addiction from the resources that are addicting us. There are two different things. We have people who have tendencies toward addiction, and they need treatment, they need help, which we are lacking sorely. Then there are items that can addict us, up to and including sex and power and food. So there are people who are addicted to things, and then there are different entities or different items that we could be addicted with. Marijuana may or may not be one. But what I can see, the same thing with alcohol. And I would rather start looking at alcohol and some of the car crashes and things of that nature that we're suffering from, the deaths from them, than marijuana. I don't think you'll see a comparable number. So if we're going to look at the relationship between death and accidents due to a drug, I think we're going to have to look at liquor.
Senator, you'll have 1 minute.
Yeah, well, we have in fact looked at liquor and alcohol consumption in terms of how it relates to automobile accidents. We have very tough DWI laws in the state of New York, and I've supported those. In fact, people can actually lose their license for a period of 25 years if they have a string of these DWIs. And that's as it should be. People who drink and drive should be prosecuted because we've had too many innocent people killed with a drinking and driving accident. And so I agree, we need to come down tough there, and we have.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Boyer.
All right, well, we managed to go 100 days without a state legislator being indicted, but we had one yesterday up in the Rochester area. But obviously, we continue to have issues with corruption in Albany. So I'd like to ask you both, just your thoughts on what priorities or what reforms you would advocate for first in order to try to help improve that situation. We've heard about outside income limits, general term limits, and campaign finance reform. So any of those or anything else, what do you think would work best?
All right, Senator Seward, you're up first on state corruption.
Mm-hmm. Well, the arrest yesterday was for bribery, and bribery is against the law currently. Mm-hmm. And all of the officials that you've seen tried and convicted of crimes, they have violated existing laws. There are a number of things that I think we need to do to deal with this problem, because believe me, I think it's vitally important that we restore the public's trust in their elected officials, and that's something that's one of my priorities. And now, where we need to go at this juncture, we've had people right around the governor convicted of crimes this past year, and that's why we need to move forward with the New York State Procurement Integrity Act, which passed the Senate already. That would give the state comptroller much more oversight on the disbursements of funds, and that is very important to have that type of accountability in the system. I also would favor legislation I've already supported in the Senate that would develop a database so everyone could see where the monies are going in terms of economic development projects and other spending that is directed toward that purpose. Everyone would be able to see, know what the job target numbers are, and whether or not those targets have been met. We need much more transparency there. I think that the JCOPE, which we created a few years ago, needs a major overhaul. I find JCOPE to be both weak and ineffective. It's in a way, it's where investigations go to die. We need to have an independent form of a JCOPE, independent of the governor, so that they can vigorously root out any corruption that may exist.
Thank you, Senator. Ms. St. George, on the issue of corruption in New York State.
Well, we agree on the outside. What I would like is a special prosecutor's office for public officials. Back in the 70s, I worked as an investigator for the special prosecutor for anti-corruption in New York City, rooting out corruption in the criminal justice system. And what I'm looking at now, and one of the reasons I'm running, is because of the level of corruption I see in Albany. And it's not the illegal, it's the legal. It's the ability of somebody to collect $200,000 during an election season from the companies that he is supposed to be overseeing. It's the conflicts of interest. It's getting money from pharmaceuticals when you're supposed to be looking at healthcare. It's the ethics committee not meeting for 8 years in Albany, having one meeting finally last year. Meanwhile, 150 people were elected officials were arrested and indicted during that time. I'd like to stop the pay to play. I don't think lobbyists should have to pay to get their word out. If a lobbyist wants to come to me, they could talk to me till the cows come home, but do not open your wallet. And I think that we have allowed too many things to happen, too many ways for people to get money that will influence their election and their incumbency. We have slush funds in the New York Dormitory Authority. We have slush funds all over that senators and assembly people can give out money, discretionary money, with no accountability, no criteria, no discretion, no way of measuring its efficacy. It's at their whim. And right now, that's how, I call it incumbents insurance. That's how many incumbents get elected, because they're able to give out money that we don't see, but it's our money. And this has to be changed.
Senator, you'll have 1 minute to respond.
Well, I have a broad base of financial support for my candidacies, and I also have a very solid track record of standing up for my constituents. I answer only to my constituents in this district. You know, my activities as chairman of the insurance committee have been I do not oversee the insurance companies. That's the job of the Department of Financial Services. I enact legislation dealing with insurance issues. And for those bills to become law, they first have to pass the Senate Insurance Committee. 99% of the bills that pass my committee with bipartisan support. Same on the floor of the state Senate, bipartisan support, and over in the Assembly then goes to the governor for his signature. So there's plenty of accountability built into the system.
Thank you. Anything to add? You have 1 minute.
Oh my gosh. I do not want to single you out as much as I think that this is a culture that we have in Albany where pay-to-play works, where bills are influenced, where people are forgotten, and I do think it's why we have such so many issues. I run a food pantry, and most of this district runs around 20% in poverty. We have no solutions. There is nothing going on to help people in poverty. But why? Because there are no lobbyists for the poor. But there are lobbyists for insurance and for the pharmaceuticals, for everything else. I want to end pay to play. And I think we're talking about a culture, not a person, but a culture that has been ingrained in Albany for many years that has legalized corruption and conflicts of interest that we can get rid of. It would not take a lot. And I would think that most elected officials would agree with it.
All right, like health insurance, I think this could go on for a while. We are at the end of our time. In fact, I'm not even going to give Mr. Boyer his last question. So with that, we are going to go to closing statements. We have asked you to keep it to 2 minutes, and Kai, who is our student timer, will keep you to that. We're going to hear from Senator Seward first. He's on the Republican, Conservative, Independent, and Reform Party lines. Senator.
Thank you. I've enjoyed the discussion here today. Over the years, my office has worked personally with thousands of constituents with their state government-related problems. I have never lost sight of the reason that I first ran for senator, to serve the public and to help improve the lives of those who call this area home. That's a responsibility I take very seriously, and I will continue to uphold it. I very much regret the fact that politics today has become so polarizing and divisive. I'm not interested in finger pointing, shouting at each other, scoring political points, and that's why I always put people and common sense first and do what's right for my constituents to get results. As I work to create new and better opportunities for the people of our region, my focus will be on the concerns that I hear from people every day: property tax relief, economic development, aid for our schools, access to health care, opportunities for our future. A number of steps have already been taken to move us in the right direction, but there's so much more to do. And that's why I will concentrate on measures that will lower taxes in New York, keep runaway wasteful government spending in check, create jobs, enhance educational opportunities, provide access to quality, affordable health care, and to help our farmers, our veterans, our seniors, and other hard-working New Yorkers who are really the backbone of our state. These are the priorities my constituents share with me every day, and they're the priorities I'll continue to fight for next year in the state Senate. If reelected, I'll continue to work closely with and for the people of our upstate region, ensuring that our needs, our views, and our values are well represented in Albany. I will continue to stand up for upstate New York. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Senator. We'll now hear from Joyce St. George, who is on the Democratic and Women's Equality Party. Welcome, and again, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, and thank you so much for doing this. It's important that people get the word out. It's important that people hear how we differ and also how we're similar. I think it's important at this point in time in our history that we look at where we are as a state, where we are as a rural part of the state, and whether or not we can look at ourselves and look at one another and see if we feel like we have dignity. And I could tell you for many people in my world, in the 9 counties that I've been at, people feel they're not being heard. They're feeling that the state is not representing them. We have underserved people that are screaming for attention and not getting it. I would like to ask you, all the people in New York State District 51, are we that much better off than we were 32 years ago? Because that's how long Senator Seward's been with us. And I think he has done good things on some levels. But I think that we now have a very different state, and we are at a juncture that requires innovation, creativity, and the ability to stand up and fight lobbyists and fight other people who are trying to take away the rights of women, take away the rights of LGBTQ people, trying to minimize the abilities of people with disabilities. We need to fight, and I am a fighter. I believe in our rural New York. I believe in all the things that we can do. I see issues, but I see opportunities and solutions. I don't just let them go, and I just don't want a commission to tell me what is the problem. I want to be able to serve everybody here and do it with dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. St. George. And again, thank you both, not only for being here in the studio to talk to the public, but also for putting yourselves out there in a campaign mode, which is not always easy, as we've been seeing on the national level. We'd also like to thank Mr. Boyer for his thoughtful questions as usual. He'll be back in the studio on Tuesday with our next forum. But we want to also thank you, our viewers, for taking the time to listen to the candidates, and we encourage you to go vote on November 6th, as we just said. You can watch these forums on auburnpub.com. They are usually put up the same night they are put up the same night that they run on Spectrum, as well as going to the YouTube channel for the college at Media Cayuga. I said it right, hopefully this time versus the last time we did this. And you can go on and watch any of the forums there. A couple of quick programming notes. On Tuesday, we will have a rematch of the 54th Senate District. The first time Senator Pam Helming will be here. She is being challenged again by Rose Town Supervisor Kenan Baldridge, and they will be in the studio. We'll have an Inside Government next Thursday with Justin Woods, the County Administrator for Cayuga County, as well as presentations from the 2 judicial candidates who are running for Auburn City Court, Judge David Thurston and his opponent Steve Bushman. On Tuesday, October 23rd, at this point, Dana Balter will be in the studio for a one-on-one hour-long interview with me. She is challenging incumbent John Katko, who was available that day to participate in the forum, but his campaign has chosen not to participate at this stage. If it's only Ms. Balter and I will do the questions, unlike the rest of the forums, which are Mr. Boyer's questions. On Thursday, October 25th, we hope to bring you the candidates for the 50th Senate District who want to succeed Senator John DeFrancisco, who's decided not to run for re-election, as I mentioned at the top of the forum. So far, Democrat John Mannion has agreed to participate, and we are awaiting a response from his Republican opponent, Robert Antonacci. And then we close our forums on Tuesday, October 30th, with the race for the 126th Assembly District that faces off incumbent Assemblyman Gary D. Finch, a Republican, and his challenger, Cayuga County Legislator Keith Batman, who is a Democrat. Until Tuesday, for Cayuga Community College, The Citizen, I'm Guy Cosentino. We hope you have a good night, have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here in the studio on Tuesday.